Okay, well, welcome back. We had a very nice coffee break in Melbourne, lots of cake, and I hope you had the same sort of break where you are. This next session is talking about defining and measuring animal welfare. And that's a pretty important thing. We call the Animal Welfare Science Centre. Animal welfare science is a discipline, a multi-discipline, looking at veterinary behaviour, physiology. So how do we actually measure welfare? And it has to be meaningful, and it has to be accepted by the community, and it has to be accepted by industry, and it has to be science-based. So that's what we'll be talking about over the next 6 or 7 presentations. Now, our first presentation is going to be a pre-recorded presentation by Belinda Hall. Belinda's just submitted her PhD thesis here at the Animal Welfare Science Centre at the University of Melbourne, and she investigated cognitive enrichment as well as novel ways to approach behavioural measures for the assessment of animal welfare at an individual level. And I know she was working, I think, with parrots at the zoo, wasn't she, when I last attended one of her presentations? So I'll see if I can get this going, or are you doing this, Mia?
You sit next.
You sit next? Sitting next.
Yep.
Good morning. My name is Belinda Hall, and today I would like to talk to you about cognitive enrichment and expanding its definition to improve our care of captive animals. Clark's 2011 definition is often cited and states that cognitive enrichment is a task through which animals can utilize their problem-solving skills and achieve an element of control over their environment. This seems straightforward. However, there is still disagreement on what can be classed as cognitive enrichment. So here some of you ask, what is cognitive enrichment? During my PhD, we conducted an international survey of 177 zoo workers and found that there is very little agreement on what constitutes cognitive enrichment. Out of the 12 interventions you see here, none were universally accepted as cognitive enrichment, though none were completely disregarded either. The interventions which showed the most agreement were new puzzle boxes and training. Given Clark's definition, this makes sense, as they both involve problem solving. So we can see that despite an existing definition, views on cognitive enrichment vary. Regardless, cognitive enrichment is perceived as an important factor for welfare of captive animals. The appeal of offering cognitive enrichment to captive animals is multifaceted. Firstly, there is evidence in both human and animal studies that cognitive enrichment can decrease cognitive decline in aging. There are also multiple works which have suggested that this type of enrichment increases opportunities for animals to experience control and autonomy, both of which are accepted as being required for good welfare. Additionally, there is evidence that the challenge of cognitive enrichment is desired. For example, contra freeloading has been seen in dwarf goats when engaging in cognitively challenging tasks, as reported by Langvernon and colleagues in 2009. This suggests that animals not only participate in cognitive tasks because they must, but because they are intrinsically motivated to do so. Finally, from a conservation and education perspective, having animals who demonstrate their cognitive abilities instead of simply existing to be viewed makes for a more engaging visitor experience. So we have reason to deliver cognitive enrichment, but what does that look like in practice? In the literature, studies citing the use of cognitive enrichment in zoos and aquariums are mainly reporting on puzzle feeders. These studies often report that not all animals are successful at completing the tasks. Most studies, including my own, show that when puzzle feeders are placed in with multiple animals of the same species, there are those who are unable to successfully navigate the task, even when their conspecifics are able to do so. There are also reports of animals who have no interest in engaging in the puzzle feeders at all. While you would think that solving problems takes time and persistence, the truth is that compared to the amount of time these feeders are in place, the amount of time the animals actually spend with them are minimal. As for the resulting behavioural impact of placing these feeders, results are mixed, with some studies detecting no change, some which report positive change, and other changes being recorded that could be perceived as negative. My own work, which explored the response of 6 individual parrots of 3 different species, 2 of them that you can see here, support the reports of variable use and success. Given that puzzle feeders are most likely to be considered when attempting to supply animals in captivity with cognitive enrichment, and that engagement with them is variable depending on the individual, it is unlikely that all animals who are exposed to this style of cognitive challenge are benefiting as intended. As such, a rethink of how we approach cognitive enrichment may be required so that we can provide adequate cognitive challenges to all of our captive animals. We know from previous work that there are 3 levels of cognition, all very important. As it stands now, cognitive enrichment aims to challenge the highest level of cognitive functioning with tasks designed to present them with problems. However, cognition is less about individual skills and functions and more about how it all works together. This may be why so many people disagree on what types of interventions are cognitively enriching. Generally, it is agreed that cognitive processing can occur in 2 different directions, bottom-up or top-down. Bottom-up processing occurs when environmental cues stimulate the animal's cognitive and behavioural responses. For example, an animal smells food and so follows its senses to locate it. This animal has likely engaged a whole host of cognitive skills and functions to obtain the food, but is working from the bottom up. Top-down processing draws on a mental representation of the world, which has within it memories, references, and established connections which can direct behaviour. For example, a hungry dog is without food. Previous experience dictates that the food comes from behind a door, but the door cannot be navigated by the animal. So it goes to find a human to open the door and proceeds to perform a set of behaviours which have previously resulted in the door being opened. Both scenarios involve food and both require skills and functions from multiple levels. But the top-down scenario, in my opinion, would be classed as cognitively enriching regardless of whether the goal was obtained, because cognitive enrichment should be a top-down process which results in an increased understanding of the world. Ways to support top-down cognitive processing can be explored in 3 different ways. Emulative cognitive enrichment aims to create wildlife situations which animals must navigate. This type of enrichment is not likely to be suitable for animals who will spend their life in captivity. However, through creating lifelike challenges like having to catch live prey or locate food which is protected or obscured, animals must use and modify their understanding of their environment to be successful. Associative programs allow for animals to build on their mental maps of the world by learning how to predict events and control aspects of their environment through learnt behaviour. This is likely the easiest and most cost-effective cognitive enrichment program to implement for a range of animal species. Allowing animals to create associations with elements of their environment which would allow them to anticipate both positive and negative events creates a sense of control, as long as they can choose to locate themselves closer or further away from the predicted event as desired. Goal-directed enrichment challenges specific cognitive skills and requires animals to have some level of skill and motivation for them to be used successfully. Examples of this style of enrichment include things like puzzle feeders and mazes. While a valid way of delivering cognitive enrichment, it must be acknowledged that the animals must be motivated to participate to benefit from this type of intervention. The culmination of my research has resulted in an expanded definition of cognitive enrichment. This definition states that cognitive enrichment is any intervention which causes an animal to challenge, add to, or draw upon its current understanding of the environment as evidenced by a sufficient level of competence, the outcome of which correlates with the validated measures of good welfare. This expanded definition removes the human bias towards manipulating the environment and allows for experiences to be cognitively enriching without interacting with a task. This is important as we have seen that not all animals want to engage in such tasks. Additionally, the inclusion of environmental understanding in this definition also encompasses the concepts of control and predictability, which are valued components of cognitive enrichment. This definition also accounts for the evolution of experiences as long as it serves to support environmental understanding or increase competence. This means that the need for novel problem solving would not be the only way to supply animals with cognitive enrichment. Some examples of how this could be done include increasing competence by reducing the amount of time known tasks are available for, decreasing the size of targets, or making physical components more nuanced. We could also layer known challenges, incorporating multiple types of challenge which have been previously mastered together and requiring all aspects to be mastered before a reward is obtained. Requiring cooperation by presenting animals with problems that can only be overcome by two elements being mastered simultaneously. We can also decrease clarity in some aspects of tasks, for example, making cues more subtle, making elements more similar, or adding non-functioning elements to already mastered tasks. Finally, we can also challenge the animal's ability to generalize by presenting known challenges in new ways or in novel locations. There are two ways in which the success of cognitive enrichment can be evaluated under the expanded definition: through competence and welfare. Any evidence of competence shows that the animal's mental representation of the world has been impacted in a positive way. This includes successful completion of a new task, increased speed of completion, increased accuracy, and anticipation in response to cues. Additionally, positive welfare indicators can also be used, such as positive anticipation, improved health, increased expressions of positive behaviours, or decreased expressions of negative behaviours. Although the changes in these indicators may simply be evidence of enrichment without understanding. As such, evidence of competence would be required to state that cognitive enrichment had been achieved. Broadening our view of cognitive enrichment in this way allows us to consider more ways to incorporate cognitive challenge into the lives of animals. It also removes the need to physically interact with tasks, which is beneficial to shyer animals or those with less developed motor skills. By removing the need for tasks to be physically interacted with, we are acknowledging that animals such as reptiles who are not inclined to physically manipulate tasks still require cognitive enrichment. The proposed expanded definition also sets goals for environmental understanding and supplies us with ways to measure impact through evidence of improved competence. It is only through implementing interventions which fit the criteria set out by the proposed expanded definition that we will know its true impact. However, until then, acknowledging that there are a range of ways animal cognition can be enriched in captive environments can only serve to promote its use. Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda, from afar. Now, we've got 3 pre-recorded presentations. There's this one, and then there's a couple of other ones coming up. If you've got any questions, you could, on the specific topic, please email the researcher directly, or if it's a burning question, ask it anyway, and we'll see if we can answer it here. Especially, how do we get all that into production animal? It's interesting. So without further ado, though, on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Jax Cummins. Now, Jax is a research intern from the UK. We have working with us at the centre at the moment. She's passionate about animal welfare research, particularly within zoos, and particularly with those species which are under-researched. And you'll see that when she gives her presentation on visitor effects on the behavioural responses of cobras. Thanks, Jax. Oh, you can use that, I think, hopefully. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jax Cummins, and today I'll be presenting a proposal for my study on monocled cobra preferences. I'll discuss background information on preference tests, prior research related to the study design, methodology, aims, and expectations of the study. Research on visitor effects is vital for zoo animal welfare, as visitors can impact animals both positively, neutrally, or negatively. While 56% of studies focus on mammals like primates and felids, research on non-mammals such as reptiles, fish, and amphibians began only in 2020. Reptiles accounted for just 9% of research. Most visitor impact models study on primates using preference tests to assess responses to conditions like window visibility and visitor presence. For example, orangutans and preferred in visually enriching windows, while one-way viewing reduced aggression in capuchin. However, research on non-mammalian species, like reptiles, remains limited. Research shows tortoises prefer human interaction, but responses vary by individual. During zoo closures, most reptiles responded neutrally or positively, though European glass lizards spent less time exposed. These findings highlight discrepancies in existing visitor impact models, pointing to the need for more tailored models for non-mammalian species. We're examining if cobras prefer covered or uncovered windows by tracking proximity, orientation, and time spent near each. We expect them to favour covered windows, which may reduce stress by balancing hiding and monitoring behaviours. Ultimately, these findings could improve reptile welfare through better enclosure design. Our objective is to assess monocled cobra window preferences in a zoo setting. We're comparing behaviours under three conditions: left window covered, right window covered, and both windows uncovered. Key behaviours measured include proximity to each window, orientation towards the windows, and time spent near each one. We will set up infrared cameras to record cobra behaviours during set observation hours. Using instantaneous point sampling at 2-minute sampling intervals, we will gather data from a total of 1,080 observations. We will focus on distance within 15 centimetres of the windows, orientation towards or away from the windows, and the total time spent near each window. We will use infrared cameras to monitor cobra behaviours, such as proximity and orientation away from the windows in low light conditions. The cameras will allow for non-intrusive 24/7 observations. For ambient noise, we will use the Decibelmeter app to measure visitor-induced noise and vibrations, recording noise levels at regular intervals. Our study aims to identify if covered windows reduce stress in cobras, guide better enclosure design for reptiles, and contribute valuable data to improve non-mammalian visitor impact models. This concludes my presentation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we've got another pre-recorded presentation. This is from Stephanie Blyth. Now, Steph's an honours student who completed her project this year, her honours project in collaboration with Zoos Victoria, who are a key partner of the Animal Welfare Science Centre. And her project was identifying animal-based welfare measures for 6 of their house species, and you should be finding out more about it now.
Hi everyone, my name is Steph. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today because I have COVID, but I did an honours year this year and my project was in collaboration with Zoos Victoria, looking at identifying animal-based welfare measures that are routinely collected in reptiles, felids and ungulates at Werribee Open Range Zoo. So as we know, animal welfare is the whole state of the animal, and to benchmark animal welfare there needs to be a focus on animal-based measures. So these measures include physical, physiological and behavioural indicators, and they measure the direct state of the animal rather than just the environmental factors that are affecting it. So within zoos of Zoos Victoria, they're already collecting animal-based measures within their species management, and they also have an annual or biennial welfare risk assessment in place, but they were interested in understanding which measures are collected for some of their species, areas that may be lacking, and possibly the future development of a regular welfare monitoring tool. So my project aimed to identify existing animal-based welfare measures that are routinely collected for 6 species at Werribee, and the processes and frequencies of these. We wanted to establish the standard routine of animal caretakers with each of the species and to determine if any were lacking measures and considering the use of welfare monitoring tools. So alongside a literature review, I collected my data primarily through a survey given to one zookeeper and one vet for each species chosen. There were 6 species in total I was looking at, 2 reptiles, 2 ungulates and 2 felids, and the survey determined all animal-based measures collected for each, the frequencies, the processes, and where and if the data was recorded. As an example, within the ungulates there were similarities such as fecal egg counts and daily physical observations, but differences such as body condition score, which was conducted quarterly for the giraffe, albeit not often recorded, and not conducted at all for the zebras. Giraffe weights were reviewed weekly to monthly, but collected very infrequently for zebras. A couple of recommendations made were to increase the frequency of collection of welfare measures for individual species. So for example, body condition score and or the weight for the plain zebra. Also to record all data collected, and it was also important to consider the logistics and feasibility of implementing some of the changes. And some possible future directions for this research include identifying welfare indicators in other species, reptile welfare research for behavioural and physiological indicators that could be suitable for welfare, developing welfare assessment tools specific to species that can be used in zoos. Thank you for your time today. I would like to briefly acknowledge my supervisor Lauren, who has been amazing this year, all of the team at Zoos Victoria, and Rutu for some assistance with Qualtrics. This is obviously an incredibly brief snapshot of research, so if anyone has any questions or wants to know more, please feel free to reach out to me or Lauren.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's a good example of a good practical, simple collaboration between the Animal Welfare Science Centre and Zoos Victoria. Our next speaker, and remember to, if you've got any questions, to shoot them through, and we'll get to them at the end of this session, is Mia Cobb. Now, Mia's got a very, very, very long association with the Animal Welfare Science Centre, having completed a PhD quite a while ago at Monash University, when Monash was part of the centre. Mia is the inaugural Chaser Innovation Fellow for Canine Welfare Science at the University of Melbourne, and she let the dogs out rather than letting the dogs in.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks to everyone that's joining us online and also for everyone who's come to be here in person. We really appreciate it. I'd like to start by thanking my collaborators on the topic that I'm talking about today. So that's Aashna Jimenez at Colgate University in New York, and also Nancy Dreschel at Penn State University in Pennsylvania. I also really want to say a big thank you to the philanthropic funding that made my research fellowship possible at the University of Melbourne, and that's the Chaser Initiative. We'll give them an institute status for today. All right, so for just the next 8 minutes, I'm hijacking you and welcoming you to the field of canine science. This is where I spend most of my time. I am a welfare scientist, but I live in this very interdisciplinary world where we're all interested in dogs. When we go to the Canine Science Conference or the Canine Science Forum, which are our big international conferences, we have a mix of people there that are exploring evolution, cognition, perhaps human-animal interactions, looking at things from a One Health perspective. It's a real mixing bag, and I am there championing welfare every step of the way. We have got a bit of a problem, though, in canine welfare science, and that's that we've become a little bit stuck in relying on one limited measure when we're looking at the experience of dogs, which is cortisol, and also not being very specific in the terminology that we use. So we tend to talk about our dogs stressed and what is the stress. And I'm here to now advocate that we need to move past that. So obviously this is important because dogs are all around us. They live with us, they work for us, and they're really important in our lives. We have many industries that we just simply can't do the tasks that we do without dogs. We couldn't smell currency, for example, or explosives without their help. We can't herd as many sheep easily. They do the work of up to 4 stock people on farm. And we also have them assisting, obviously, people with disabilities all around, and we're seeing this explosion in therapy dogs as well. So they're really important, and what we're finding is these industries also need ways to be able to assure the public that we're taking good care of their welfare. So we need to have robust measures, not just of an absence of negative welfare states, but also of positive welfare states. So we're moving out of this area of just reducing cruelty and, you know, negative treatment, and looking for ways to reassure well-being. And what we're finding now, canine science is a fairly young field. It's almost like because the dogs were asleep on our couch, we forgot to study them. So we're a little bit behind the livestock areas, probably also representing the lack of funding in that space. A lot of our research with dogs tends to focus on how they help us, and we kind of forget to look at maybe what they need to have a good life. And so our current practices just aren't aligning with our evidence base. So the problem with stress is that it's really confusing, okay? When we talk about stress, it's oversimplifying a really complex physiological response or range of responses that can be happening across multiple systems. We're talking about things like the nervous system, the endocrine system, our immune system. We have huge individual variations in these areas based on genetics, perhaps age, learning experiences. The size of animals matters. And we also need to be using more precise terminology. So when we say stress, are we talking about the trigger? Are we talking about that stress response that's happening physiologically? Are we talking about the behaviour that we're seeing? Or are we talking about what the animal's feeling? And I think we've got better understanding after the last 10 years of research in canine science to be more precise and more specific about what we're actually talking about. So cortisol tends to be the measure when people do have a bit of funding that they can include a measure of canine experience that they tack on. Often it's salivary cortisol, could also be urinary or fecal cortisol. And what we're seeing is people really, really want cortisol to be a pH test for stress. So they want high cortisol to be indicative of stressful, negative experiences with dogs, and low cortisol to be indicative of positive, good states of welfare. It's just not the case. Cortisol is really complex. It's involved in lots of different things. It's involved in just fluctuates during the day. It can be involved in our immune responses. It can be involved in how we process energy. And what we see is, you know, it's having really serious implications for decisions we're making about dogs and how we utilise them and work with them. So, for example, I can think of a study that showed that dogs being used in a certain therapy situation had a stress response that showed cortisol elevating, and then it dropped right off. And the conclusion drawn from that was that the dogs coped really well in this situation. That is one possible interpretation. Another is that they were so stressed that their stress system basically fatigued and collapsed and could no longer respond to that situation. And if we're making decisions based that might be informing policy or the ways that we run these programs, this is really important to understand. So we need to be using more than just one indicator. The other problem that we see constantly in the conclusion sections of papers that have used cortisol is that there's high intra and inter-individual variability, and often our sampling is not taking enough measures from individuals and between them to be able to draw robust conclusions. So what we've proposed in this paper that is coming up soon, it's currently been revised, is back under consideration with the Animal Welfare Journal, is taking a more systems-based approach to how we measure physiological indicators of canine welfare. So we want to acknowledge that there are many physiological systems, that they're interconnected, and that each of these systems offers new potential indicators. And this is a really exciting space. We've been looking at things that have been happening with other species and in other fields, but just haven't been explored in dogs. And there's a lot of potential here. We do need to make sure that we're also considering the interactions between the systems. And you can see here there's lots of connectivity through our blood circulation, through our hormones, different parts of the body, and lots of different things that we can measure. And also at the moment, there's a big push for us to be considering the least invasive type of measurement that we can in welfare-related research. So there's some really exciting, positive, promising new indicators, and we're talking about things like immunoglobulins or antibody responses. We're talking about things like telomeres that might give us a really good indication of a cumulative, thanks, Caro, experiences over life, and things like oxidative stress. And Aashna has actually just published a new paper with Rosemary Strasser that has looked at this for the first time. And interestingly, they've found there's a really important component to do with the weight of the dogs. And that's something we probably don't routinely report when we're doing our canine welfare research. So these are really exciting, but we still have a lot of work to do. We need to do more validation studies for these new indicators. We need to standardise our protocols so that between different studies we're using the same methods, and we need to make sure that we have reference ranges established as well, so that then we know what is normal for dogs in these different settings, because we know that dogs can react differently if they're in a shelter, a displaced environment, compared to in their regular home or perhaps in a working dog kennel facility. So for now, my recommendations to the field of canine welfare science is to try and use specific terminology as much as we can. Definitely avoid using cortisol alone as an indicator for welfare. It is not a pH test, and we do the dogs a disservice when we lean on it. We want to make sure that we're using multiple indicators and really considering the systems that are appropriate to the context of the question that we're asking. Make sure where we can that we're including validated behavioural information as well. That can often be a really good key to help us interpret what we're seeing physiologically. And absolutely capture and report on these individual dog characteristics like sex and age and breed or size and weight. Thanks once again to the Chaser Initiative and the University of Melbourne for their support for my role, and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mia. Now we have a Menti for you, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay, so the question is, where do welfare indicators... What?
We might be stuck again.
Are we stuck? Oh, God, I don't know why we bother with this.
I don't know. Because it's important to hear everybody's perspective.
Is this the first question?
Just give 1 minute if you would like to just fill the space for
Okay, I'll fill the space.
talking.
So this question here is asking, where do welfare indicators need the most improvement in your view?
So think about it, and we just need to refresh.
We're just refreshing Menti as we speak.
1 second.
Yep, I'll give you 1 second. Here we go. So where do they need the most improvement in terms of their effectiveness? So is it novel indicators, standardization of the assessments, training for assessors? We talked about, we haven't talked about qualitative behavioural assessment yet, or at all. Where do you think it sits? So that seems to have nearly worked out. That's good. So standardizing assessments across species or within species, but across sectors seems to be the most important. And then relevant training and then on-farm assessment. And there are, speaking from experience here, there are on-farm assessment protocols for pig welfare, but they've never been adopted apart from one farm in Western Australia. So that's that one. Thank you very much indeed. So the next question is, what do you see as the biggest challenge in using behaviour as a welfare indicator?
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't come.
I was watching behaviour on a screen. I'm just surprised it's not higher than 13%.
Okay, I think we'll stop there. Subjectivity, time taken, yeah, practicality, variability between animals, environmental influences, certainly. Somebody who answered other, it may only be one person or it might be two person. What's other? If it's in the room, or put it in chat if you can.
Nothing coming through.
Anything? So it wasn't anybody in the room? Nobody's put anything in the chat?
Might have been a miss.
Hey?
Might have accidentally.
Might have been a finger accident. Might have been the finger was pointing in the wrong direction. All right. And then the last one is, in terms of providing effective enrichment, okay, so we've really only had one chat about enrichment today, which is Belinda's. In terms of providing effective enrichment, and that's all enrichment, environmental enrichment as well, what would you say is the greatest barrier? We'll find out what other is. Oh, nothing is easy.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, have we stabilised? I think we have. So time and labour, cost, don't know what works. That's a really important one. And it might get more important if I let it go on. No. Biosecurity or health risks, certainly, you know, bringing straw in for pig production, etc. And so what I want to know is, I want to know who put other down there, and what do you mean by other, please? Anybody in the room?
Is there something in chat about other?
Yes. Attitudes.
Attitudes to, yes, that's okay. Yep. Yep. And then who said nothing? It's easy. I'd like to know what sector that person is in. Lab animals? Perhaps.
Dogs.
Nothing coming through? Take the dog for a walk twice a day. That might be the
Jeremy.
that might be the enrichment. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's move on to the next thing, which is a discussion where you can ask your questions about from the speakers we've just had. So that's Mia and Jax. As I said before, the other two speakers, which were Belinda and Steph, if you've got a burning question, please ask it in the chat or hear it in the room. If you've got a particular question which you think only they will be able to answer, please email them. And again, you can get our programme details by scanning that QR code at the top. So without further ado, what questions have we got, Peter?
I'll just read one comment from Amy Rose in the chat, just going back to our conversation about enrichment. And they suggested that actually defining effective enrichment is one of the biggest barriers. Okay, we have, Amy Rose again, thank you. Two questions for Mia. In the canine science world, is there any current research or focus on the One Welfare Framework specifically for dogs?
So there is some emerging work looking more in the, I guess, therapy and assistance dog areas. What I'm thinking, we've been looking at things like social determinants of health. So applying some of the strategies and measurements that have been used in humans and taking a lens to therapy and assistance dogs. And that work's happening out of the University of Adelaide in Australia. In terms of, if you're talking about more One Health, One Welfare, for populations of dogs that are living alongside people, so not necessarily as companion or working dogs, but free-ranging dogs, remembering, of course, because I know you know this, that 80% of the world's dogs are not living directly under the care of people. They're actually living free-ranging. There is lots of work happening in India and Morocco and other parts of Europe as well at the moment. And I'd say that's a real watch this space. I think we'll have a lot more understanding of those areas in the next 2 to 3 years as that research is completed and gets published and shared with us.
Thanks, Mia. Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Cutting your lunch. Can I give Amy's second question?
Please do.
Also for Mia, is the endocrinology of things such as fur, the Court DHEA ratio, or the whole metabolomes currently used for assessing stress arousal in dogs? And if so, how successful or accurate are they?
Yeah, great question. There has been, things like cortisol in hair has been looked at on and off over the last 15 years, I'd say. I think Nick Branson did some really good work in that area out of the University of New England, looking at sound shyness with dogs and correlation to cortisol in the hair. But I think, again, like we just lack really intensive testing of these kinds of measures. So I think what we actually need is research investment to validate robust measures. And we just haven't had that. What we have is people coming along with funding to do a study, often focused on how dogs help people, wanting to tack on an indicator for canine welfare. They look at the existing literature. It's really heavily skewed in terms of things like salivary cortisol. And so they think, oh, I'll do salivary cortisol. And unfortunately, despite its really well understood limitations, we just see that cycle perpetuating. So there is definitely other things have been looked at, but I'd say not to the point that we can really consider them validated and robust indicators.
Thanks, Mia. One from the room, I think Jax.
Hi, Jax. I have a question. Great presentation. I noticed in your proposal, you've got 3 treatments that you'll study. So you're covering, no windows, the right window, and then the left window. Yeah. Is there something in the enclosure design where you would expect differences in left and right window closures, or is that just to sort of cover bases?
It's just that we thought maybe it depends on, I guess, the design of the enclosure. If there's more barriers on the left window, for example, they might, they might have more chance to avoid like visitors, whereas on the right window, for example, there might be less barriers, visual barriers, so they could have differences there. It's just to cover bases in general, but it does depend on the enclosure design. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jack. Anybody online? Oh, one in the room, right at the back.
Probably a question for Steph, but I referred to a supervisor, Lauren. With zoo animals, has there been much work done as a measure of welfare looking at GPS locations, ice tag type things to work out how much time's lying, how much time's walking, all those sort of, and you could probably apply it to reptiles.
Yeah, not a lot, because there's rightfully so reluctance to wearable technology on zoo animals, but there is some work that looks at, say, maybe time budgets to look at location within the enclosure, location use. There's a lot of work that's looked at particularly visitor effects and activity, but also that location within the enclosure to see, use that as a measure of approach or avoidance with regards to visitors too. But I think some of the automated technology that perhaps is starting to develop, the use of cameras and whatnot as well, will allow more of that work, which means that you don't need to wear, say, an ice tag or a GPS.
Any other questions? Thank you. In the audience or online?
Yes, we have a question here, maybe for either of our speakers, but maybe also opening up to the room and some of the vets in the room. Any idea of how vets are responding to increased requests for stress relief for animals, including medications, and whether a one health or one welfare approach is being applied when animals seem stressed?
I'll throw to you now. Give you I think, I mean, obviously coming from a canine perspective, I think it's really worth unpacking this, because I think there's a really good question about what is problem behaviour and who is it a problem for. And so we see a lot of people may be unhappy with dogs that are barking or are digging or are escaping properties, but when we dig down and look at what are the causes behind that, what are these dogs feeling, often it's social isolation, often it's frustration at being left alone, often it's a lack of appropriate activity and engagement and agency in their lives. So I think I understand people might want a quick fix. I definitely understand there's a role for medications to play in helping to modify behaviour, but I think we need to be careful about labelling behaviour as problems without actually really considering what is that animal trying to express when it's showing us these behaviours.
And then one last question. Yes.
Thank you for the great presentation. I am interested in to ask a question regarding with dogs. I would like to know if there is special types or breed of dogs that get more stress than the other. Which types, for example, I don't know, bikinis or.
Which types of dogs are more likely to get stressed?
Yes, that's.
I'd say the ones who have the least agency in their lives. If you're asking specifically about breeds, I won't do that. No, we know that we see as much behavioural variation within breeds as we do between them. And so it's not helpful to categorise individual dogs into breeds and stereotypes like that. Yeah. We're out of time.
No, we're not.
Oh, no.
I have a question.
Okay, I'm still carried.
No. Forget Caro. I'm running this. I'm interested in qualitative behavioural assessment. Not so good with Cobras, perhaps, but I would have thought dogs would be a great candidate. So what's being done in that area? Is it valid or?
Thanks, Jeremy, after a physiology-based presentation to ask me about QBA. I don't know whether Shen has looked into this as well. Is Shen still here? No. I think there's been some work done. I haven't looked over it recently, so that's something I'd probably need to come back and tell you about.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Please thank Jax and Mia. Okay, we're into the second part of our animal welfare assessment and measuring part of the day. However, the very first presentation isn't about that at all. It's Aashna Tapia, who is an intern or
research assistant
here at the centre, is just going to give you a bit of an update on how to keep abreast of what the centre does. Thanks, Aashna.
Thank you for the introduction, Jeremy. Once again, hi, I'm Aashna. I'm a research assistant at the, let me just move on, at the Animal Welfare Science Centre, and I also coordinate the centre's newsletter. As you know, I'll be talking to you about the ways you can keep up with us throughout the year. The Animal Welfare Science Centre's newsletter comes out 3 to 4 times a year and is a snapshot of all our activity. So this includes profiles of our researchers, publications, fieldwork updates, and media activity as well. So if you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter, you can via this link or the QR code, which we'll also share in the Zoom chat. It is a fantastic read in my unbiased opinion. This year, we've also set up a profile for the Animal Welfare Science Centre on LinkedIn. So if that is your space, please consider following us there as well to keep up with our new publications and updates in real time. We also use this space to announce any upcoming events, seminars, and other activity. If you prefer social media platforms, we are active on Facebook and Twitter or X. So if that's where you like to spend your social media time, please follow us there as well. We share updates to do with our researchers' podcast, radio, and TV interviews. Our team's latest publications and also seminars that we host or participate in. If you'd like to learn more about our centre's researchers, you can do so by searching the Find an Expert portal on the University of Melbourne website. And their profile includes their backgrounds, their area of expertise or research interests, their contributions and publications. And of course, if you'd like to reach out to us to inquire about collaboration, offer us generous amounts of research funding to find out more about our research, you can always email us at the email presented on the screen here. Thank you very much.
All right, next up is Peta Taylor. Peter's a lecturer in animal science at the School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences. Peta specialises in poultry welfare, and she did her PhD here at the centre a few years ago. And Peter's going to talk about feather licking rather than feather pecking. Thank you.
Jeremy. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm bringing the poultry to the showcase, but the centre actually has a nice long history in poultry science and quite a lot of research in this space at the moment. In particular, things like looking at piling and smothering in laying hens with one of our researchers, Maxine Fogarty, who I imagine is maybe listening at home with a brand new little baby, Richie. So shout out to them. But the poultry I wanted to talk about today is one that rarely gets airtime. And it's not the poultry that we eat. Those actually come hatched from eggs from breeding hens, the parent stock and the great-grandparent stock. And we don't hear a lot about these chickens. And so we have a project that's just finishing up, funded by Poultry Hub, to find out who sucks. If you don't know anything about broiler breeders or meat chicken breeders, I wanted to start with just a quick overview about the things that I think matter to know. First of all, meat chickens have an incredible genetic potential for growth, not hormones. Okay, I'm just going to say that again because I hear it a lot. Not hormones, not added hormones. They have this incredible genetic potential, and we can see this from the growth rate or the body weight of a 6-week-old chicken in 1980 was just under 1.5 kilos. We now see at 6 weeks of age in 2020, this is above 2.5. However, at the same age, those breeding chickens have kept the same weight. They have the same genetic potential, but they are feed restricted. And as that genetic potential increases, the more severe that feed restriction is. And in rearing, it can be as little as about 30% of what they actually want to eat. So that's a welfare concern. But if they were allowed to eat exactly what they wanted to eat, there would be other welfare consequences. So yes, they would produce less. They would also be lame, cardiovascular function is compromised, and there would be things like heart attacks and metabolic diseases. So it's this paradox. Welfare is compromised if we feed restrict, and welfare is compromised if we don't. I've just started getting into this space. As I said, not a lot of people talk about it. Not a lot of people are in this space around the world. And when I first looked at a farm, this is one from Europe. It's pretty similar. We have drinker lines and a few other things. But what you may see from this is that it's relatively, it lacks complexity. There's litter, there's feed, there's each other. But there's not a lot of environmental complexity. So I'm thinking, are these chickens bored as well as hungry? And so I'm going to talk about enrichment, Jeremy. When I saw this, I said, well, hey, can we improve the welfare of these animals by actually providing effective enrichment? And actually, we've been doing a lot of work with effective enrichment in poultry in this space for years. But this is a paper that came out a couple of years ago where we spoke to livestock industries in Australia and we said, what enrichment are you providing? And what aren't you providing? And why aren't you providing these ones in the literature? And what we found, scientists like me were studying things that weren't possibly practical or able to be implemented on farms. So there was this disconnect between industry and researchers. So first thing I did was I spoke to industry and I said, okay, what does effective environmental enrichment look like to you? And I expected a few responses, but not this one. Someone said, what about enrichment to reduce feather sucking? I said, what the heck is feather sucking? I've never seen it before, not seen it in meat chickens, haven't seen it in layer hens. And so we formalised the question, what the peck is feather sucking? We did an industry consultation to find out not only what is feather sucking, but what are the practical forms of environmental enrichment to reduce that behaviour. When the survey interview went for about an hour and a half, we had 17 respondents. It doesn't seem like a lot, but there are not a lot of experts in this field. They were mostly male. We had people from chicken meat integrators, breeding companies, consultants, from university and also from animal welfare organisations. It was heavily skewed towards Australian participants because that's what we wanted to make it representative of what's happening, but we also reached out to some international experts. First thing, chickens don't suck. We were reminded by participants that birds have a cleft palate, so they actually can't suck. And what does it look like? It's picking, playing, sucking, licking, biting, sliding, touching, stroking, nibbling, chewing, allo sucking. Okay, so the first thing we did was we rephrased it and we said feather licking. This was the second most common term used. And almost 60% of our respondents said there were different types of feather licking. There were some that seemed stereotypic when they were bored. There were aggressive, ones that led to cannibalism, but there was also this gentle. So we started thinking, are we talking about the same behaviour? We asked them what causes feather licking. And you can see here, feed restriction, hunger, nutritional deficiencies, maybe redirected foraging behaviour, some of those things associated with feed restriction, general stress. Maya, that one's for you. And a few other sorts of things came out. So we said, okay, we've got to see this behaviour. So we worked with industry and we watched the birds. And this is what feather licking looks like. It's slower than a peck. And you can see here, they're really targeting the tails. We saw chains of this behaviour. So up to 5 or 6 birds, you can see a small chain happening there where they were doing it to each other. It doesn't seem aversive to the recipient. And then we saw someone doing it to themselves, and then these two getting in a bit of a whirlwind response. In rearing, when we saw this behaviour, it was gentle, it was repetitive, and it was typically seen when the birds were active. The recipient rarely moved away, and 91% of the time they targeted the tips of the tail. In production, it looked like this. Well, it's slower. It's almost a little bit of a combing motion. Still gentle. It was rarely repetitive. And unlike rearing, when it was seen when they were active, it's more likely to be seen when they were clustered and resting. And although still most of it was targeted at the tip of the tail, there was also a more even distribution around the body, with 38% targeting wings. This is looking at bout duration over time. So what we can see here is this is in rearing, and the bout length starts relatively low, non-existent, and increases with age and becomes more variable. We didn't see that with feather pecking, which were shorter bouts and very stable in the duration of them, and similar sorts of things in production. So we're still on the feather licking journey, and I want to just recap where we've been. We first asked what the heck is feather licking. We listened to industry and international perspectives, and we watched the behaviour in situ. At the moment, we have surveys with stock people looking at behaviours as part of an epidemiological approach to understand what are the potential risk factors for these sorts of abnormal behaviours, with the hope to identify an enrichment to redirect feather licking, and ultimately the goal of reducing the need for the birds to feather lick in the first place. So what have we learned? Language matters. So we were all talking about feather sucking, but I'm pretty sure we're talking about different things depending on if you're watching it in production, rearing, and that matters because the consequences for welfare and the etiology will also differ depending on the behaviour and the context. I've learned that multidisciplinary approaches really benefited our understanding. So that's social science, talking to the people who are with the birds, watching the birds themselves, that ethology, and also things like epidemiology all helps us understand this behaviour. And of course, I don't need to say this, collaboration is key. So we had the doors opened with our industry partners to put video cameras up in broiler breeder sheds. And all of those industry representatives reaching out and spending their time with us. So we've got a better understanding. We've still got a little way to go. And with that, I'd like to thank Poultry Hub, Ingham's, and our collaborators on the project.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
So questions at the end, and I've got a few, and I'm sure there'll be a few in the audience as well. Next off the rank is another pre-recorded presentation by Isabel Stanley. Isabel was enrolled in the Masters of Ag Science program here at Melbourne Uni this year and completed a project on early experiences and tail biting in pigs. So Isabel's presentation will be next up.
Hello everyone, my name is Isabel Stanley and my research looked at whether early life behaviour before 4 weeks of age affects the lifelong risk of pigs being a tail biting victim. This research was conducted within a large cooperative research centre project on tail biting, and I would like to acknowledge all partners within this larger project. I would specifically like to acknowledge Reptiles Australia for facilitating the research and April, the Australasian Pig Research Institute, for supporting part of my project. So tail biting in pigs is a highly multifactorial problem, with a range of influences from within and outside of the pig that influences how the behaviour is expressed, and this can heavily influence their welfare and their productive value. Therefore, there is a strong incentive to prevent tail biting. However, the most common solution of tail docking is not ideal because of their impacts on welfare and production. However, it is difficult to transition away from this without a more predictive method being introduced. One such measure is through observations of behaviour. Pigs can learn to react differently to stimuli based on prior experiences. Therefore, detecting a pattern of behaviour that is associated with tail biting early on can increase the opportunity for intervention. To determine whether this method is credible, in my research I used an ethogram to observe the behaviour of piglets from 0 to 4 weeks of age and combined it with tail damage data taken from trained observers to examine the relationships between early life pig behaviours and the risk of tail wounds. Furthermore, I also examined the relationship between tail manipulation and other piglet behaviours. The results of this study suggest that pre-weaning behaviours, including tail biting, is not significantly associated to the risk of being a tail biting victim. Instead, the results suggested that behaviours before weaning are more likely a form of play, as tail manipulation was observed more with higher frequencies of both positive and negative behavioural welfare indicators. This includes ear manipulation, which is typically associated with poor welfare, and play behaviour, which is more frequent in pigs who are healthy or comfortable. However, as tail damage was still found before weaning, it is uncertain whether every incident of tail manipulation is a form of play. The study also found that tail damage suddenly increased during the weaner phase, and damage from 4 to 9 weeks of age can put pigs at a higher risk of more severe injuries later on. However, it is unclear whether the increased severity is due to the biting behaviour growing more aggressive with age, or whether it is due to existing injuries becoming either more attractive for biting, or the injury is gradually worsening in condition. As a result, the study did not support the use of pre-weaning behaviours to predict tail biting as an alternative management strategy to tail docking. Despite this, tail docking is still a threat to the welfare of commercial pigs, and there is still more that needs to be understood. Succeeding studies still need to address the multifactorial nature of the issue and strive for more detailed data collection. This can be through the use of post-weaning behaviours or to track behaviours at both individual and group levels, as this study was limited to group-level behavioural observations before the piglets were weaned. Furthermore, while this study focused on the victim, there is still the question of how pre-weaning behaviours can influence the risk of a pig becoming a biter.
Thank you very much, Isabel. If there's anybody in the audience who'd like to know more about the Tails project, please put your question into the chat, because I know that Lauren would be excited to talk to you about the Tails project. Next person before our Menti and then before our questions is Lucy Wotherspoon. Lucy is a research assistant here at the Animal Welfare Science Centre and is currently involved in pig research. And Lucy's going to be looking at male and female pigs to look at their behaviour after weaning. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy, and I'm going to be talking about the difference between male and female pig behaviour after weaning. So again, this project that I've been working on is actually part of a larger project that the Animal Welfare and Science Centre have been undertaking, but I'm just going to touch on the project that I've been working on over the last couple of months. So my data has come from video footage from an indoor pig farm. So we've had cameras set up at 24 different pens, 12 male and 12 female pens, with 12 pigs in each pen. And as you can see in the image there, that's the sort of layout that I had for monitoring the behaviour of these pigs. I was using the software Boris in order to undertake continuous sampling for 5 minutes at 4 time points throughout the day for the first 3 days after weaning. I was looking at 6 randomly selected pigs from each pen, so 6 of the 12, and I was looking at 21 different behaviours. I will point out here that I only just finished the data collection last week, so still in very early stages of analysis there. And I have grouped the behaviours as well in the slides, the figures that I'm about to share with you, in order just to make it a bit easier for visualising them. I've also got, we're looking at point behaviour, which is measured in count, which is here. So this is point behaviours. So in the red square, you can see the abnormal behaviours were performed more frequently by the males, which is the green bar there, compared to the females in the pink bar, whereas the head or body nosing and social behaviour was performed more evenly between the 2 sexes. In the next slide, I'm breaking down the abnormal behaviours into their individual behaviours, and most of them were performed more frequently by the male pigs. However, ear manipulation and tail biting was actually performed more frequently by the female pigs. And this is in line with previous research, which has found that female pigs do perform more tail biting than the males. Here we're looking at the state behaviours. So this is duration in seconds. And in the red box there, you can see that the pigs do spend most of their time performing inactive behaviours. So this is things such as lying down or standing. And this is again in line with previous research that's found that pigs spend most of their time, about 70%, lying down. Here I've removed the inactive behaviour and put the other behaviours onto a log scale just so that we can see them a bit more clearly. So most of these were again performed pretty evenly between the sexes except for belly nosing in the red square there. And so the males were performing that more frequently. And that's largely due to one time period in particular where the male pigs were performing that more frequently. So what's next? So obviously a bit more analysis is due, and having a look at this in relationship to tail injuries, which we have the data for those pens. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon.
Okay, before questions, we've got to do battle with Menti again. So let's see if it's working. This is an open-ended question, and it really is, you know, to assist us, I guess, in how you are all feeling here. So what do you think, in just a few words, what's the biggest challenge in assessing animal welfare? We've talked a little bit about it earlier on, you know, it's costs and time and practicality, but what do you think is, in your industry, we'll give it a minute. Yep. No. What is normal and what is... Thank you. Are we capturing this?
Yes. Yeah. Mentees.
Mentees.
The almighty. Yeah, to scroll or...
I'm trying. No. No scroll. Oh, that's like... No. Okay. Make it smaller.
It was validated measures, that's what's written.
Oh, I see, okay.
Or
I see, right. That's better. Oh, wow, we've got a lot. So let's just go right up to the very beginning and see what we've got. So apathy. Oh, there's a pro hand for you. Reliable indicators that are meaningful. Knowing what's normal first. Yep. Standardization, education, the whole state of an animal. MLA were looking at a project, weren't they, Lauren, about 2 years ago, lifetime animal welfare indicators. I think it all got a little bit too difficult, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I think essentially they were scoping whether it would be possible to measure lifetime, what they were calling as well-being, across the stages in the meat.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
goal, but certainly lots of work to do.
validated, repeatable, practical. Funding, yes, always. Time, practicality, indicators, individuals, distance, who's going to do it, I guess. Biosecurity, validated measures, again, baselines, what is normal. I mean, sometimes you just have to generate a baseline and call that normal, and then measure your progress on that baseline, like slipping in abattoirs or that, the vocalizations.
Yeah.
Reproducible measurements, understanding and measuring, struggling to measure effective states, certainly reliable indicators to indicate positive welfare. That's the first time positives come out, which is good. Variation between species, so different types of animal welfare assessment. Funding, of course, for anything other than Mia.
It wasn't me.
Thank you, Ben David. Cross-observer variability, always a problem. We had that problem in the pig one, but we managed to standardise it. So it's something you need to be aware of. Misinterpretation of the metrics, validity of the indicators. Language, still using positive, negative. What does that mean? Is that wrong language?
Maybe we just need to define what is positive, what is negative.
Okay. I mean, it's a timeline, isn't it? You have to have negative experiences in life, but you also need to have positive experiences. Human-centric lenses. Okay, so we're looking at it from our point of view. All right, well, thank you very much indeed, everybody who did that. The next part of the today is we'll get the speakers up here and we'll address some of the questions you have. So if we get Peter and Lucy, and I think that's just Peter and Lucy, isn't it?
While they're coming up, Jeremy, I can get back to you about the QBA because my end of semester fatigue brains had a moment to think.
Yeah.
And I can come back and let you know, it has been looked at a bit, particularly in shelter environments with dogs. It's considered useful, not particularly predictive. We keep having problems with assessing the behaviour of dogs in shelter and it not being predictive of long-term behaviour. And also, I think one of the issues is fairly high inter-observer variation. So different people are noticing different things. So we probably need to improve those sort of validation or what we're looking at and what we're calling it.
Yeah. I know a lot of work has gone into sheep QBA with Trish Fleming at Murdoch.
Yeah, and I think it's used a fair bit in zoos as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to be using, in heaps as well. There is a project, there's an international project in Canada, US. They want to do some pilot study here with QBA in pigs.
Right.
So that'll be interesting.
Thanks, Karen.
I've got a question I can leap into from online here from Kimberly Batson. It's for you, Peter. Now, Kimberly's asked, is feather plucking? I'm going to take the guess that the question was specifically about licking, but maybe if you want to mention plucking and licking separately or together here. Definitely negative. So is that kind of behaviour definitely negative? Is there evidence of consequences for the health or welfare of chickens and or impact on the quality of the product or service the chickens are providing?
Excellent question. We're still on the journey, and I think that's why I was conscious not to say anything. We've published the paper showing the industry concerns for welfare, which range from it's a normal behaviour all the way up to it's a stereotypy, or one of the major concerns we actually heard from industry is that they think it's the precursor to feather pecking and then cannibalism. And I think that's why the epidemiological approach is going to be also really important, because it will show what sort of precedes that behaviour and then what's likely consequence of that. So I think it depends. And I think that's why it's really important that we looked at different sexes, we looked at different ages, we've looked at a whole range of different behaviours and contexts, more than I could present today. And I think they're different. So the rearing, to me, this repetitive behaviour that becomes habitual and almost spreads in the flock, I think is pretty good evidence of it's an abnormal behaviour. Is it a stereotypy? Does it help them cope with the environment? Is a whole nother question, but one that's important because if we do get enrichment to redirect the behaviour, that welfare motivation or compromise that's leading to that is still evident. Whereas in the production birds, they're calm, they're resting. And actually, I'd never watched production breeders before, and they preen a lot, which has got me thinking about another question. Why do they preen a lot? And I think maybe this is we're all snuggled in close together for resting time, and they happen to be close to another bird and preen there. But why they preen a lot, I don't know. Feathers are important. There's some issues with feathers in the industry. Feathers are important for mating signals. That's my answer. I don't know, but I think it depends.
Thanks, Pete. Quick question for Lucy. If there is a difference, and there is a difference between male and female behaviour after weaning, any practicalities? What's the lessons for industry, or are there any, or do you have to take that into account later on?
That is a very good question. And yeah, I think we saw in the presentation that there was some differences. However, I'm not sure how significant those differences were between the sexes yet. So again, being able to dive more into the analysis will be useful. And so then when I've got a bit more of a certain answer about that, we'd be able to look at what the implications of that might be.
Okay. Thanks, Lucy. Any questions online? Any questions in the audience? Yes.
I have a question actually for Aashna. I'd like to, first of all, congratulate the Animal Welfare Science Centre for putting on this seminar. I think it's terrific from a lay perspective. I represent an AEC, which is really good. An observation though, where are the blokes? There's very few gentlemen. In your newsletter, there were no photographs of men. So is animal welfare a female occupation and interest?
Yeah, sure.
Good question, Robin.
It is a very good question. I'm not too sure if I have the answer for that.
Yeah. Well, we can.
I
think some of the Coleman research has shown that there is a gender bias in interest and care, is that the right word, about animal welfare? It's not that men don't, but there's more of a bias. We've also just had a lot of men from corner offices retire as well. And of course, we lost Andrew Fisher. Sorry.
But just it's not animal welfare. I mean, if you look at veterinary science across the country, it's all women. I don't know. I mean,
that's a question.
I think it's because we're one of the top universities in Australia and we select the top candidates.
What about Stuart? Stuart, you're from the...
I was just going to say veterinary science around the country is around about 85% female on average. And some of that one might suggest is more application of candidates in their latter school years and early science years and getting better marks, whereas perhaps not so much in some of the male cohort in that area. But there's a whole range of things that discussed around it. It is becoming an issue just that disparity to the other enrichment how it used to be.
How's that feel?
Yeah, it's not even me.
Another comment? Yes.
But it does vary, so adding to that comment, it does vary across the levels. So yes, we are seeing more younger and more early career and more undergrads and graduates that are women, but there is still a huge dropout from about level C academic upwards. So there are very few professors and associate professors in the particularly in veterinary sciences. I'm one of only few as well. And we recently had a few professors retire that are women and have we can't almost even, count any, you can count them on one hand, even at university. So, thank you.
Well, thanks for the comment. Yes, yeah.
Different question about social media. Is it with the Science Centre on Blue Sky?
It's coming. I just put into the comments, look out for some blue sky because we'll be, yeah.
Yeah. We don't drive Teslas anymore. Lauren.
Yeah, quick question follow-up to that one around so interesting. So in the commercial birds, you were talking about these a little bit more gentle than when they're sort of resting. What was the response that you're seeing of the recipients to that?
So the recipients, whether it was the repetitive, really active feather licking or it was the gentle, calm feather licking, didn't move. Didn't move away. And we've also quantified feather pecking, feather eating from the conspecific or from the other chicken or from the ground. And I think that was important because we could say it's different. It's slower than feather pecking. Feather pecking happens in different areas of the body, and the recipient almost always moves away. It's aversive. And so the gentle one, whether they like it, I don't know. Maybe my next talk will be like, do chickens like being licked? That's getting into a weird...
Yeah, someone in your survey would noted like allo grouping.
Lots of questions.
Again, with you, have you or has anybody looked at the behaviour of production chickens from the slow growing strains? And let's follow up on it as well.
Yes. Yep, there is a lot of work at the moment on slow growing strains globally. There's a push. The Build a Better Chicken commitment, one of the 7 advances is using slow growing strains. We should note that also the slow growing strains are still feed restricted as well. So, and what we call slow in Australia, I think is medium to fast. So I think even how do we define what a slow growing is? And I think there's a shift about maybe rather than slow growing about better welfare because yes, growth has negative impacts on animals, and obviously that differs where they are in the breeding part of the production, but there's also other things that matter outside of that.
I wonder if you see it in layers, because there are layer broilers within Melbourne, and I just wonder if you might see it in them.
As in laying hens?
Yeah, laying hens with the which are taken on, the males are taken on to meat chickens.
Oh, yes, okay. So layer roosters.
Yes, that's right. And it takes 12 weeks to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it must be a very small area. I'd love to go and have a look at them.
Okay.
But in layers, I have seen gentle feather licking and gentle feather pecking and severe feather pecking. I think Kate Harter and Paul and a few others from the centre have worked around that too. And I was looking at some layers the other day doing a similar gentle feather pecking on the tail, but it wasn't this repetitive, longer sort of stereotypic type peck.
There's a question, is it observed in other poultry? So not just chickens in other contexts, but other species. So is it known to happen in ducks or turkeys or other areas? Or parrots, pet parrots?
Anyone in the audience, please reach out. Our emails are on the program. Please let me know if you've seen this in others. I know that there are self-grooming stereotypes in certain parrots and those sorts of things. But and allo grooming happens across various species. But yeah, if anyone listening has any insight to this, yeah, I don't know. Love to hear.
Any other questions? Online? I've just got one thing for Aashna. Is the Animal Welfare Science Centre planning seminars for next year? No?
I have no idea.
Maybe that's a question for Lauren later. Okay. Good. All right, well, please thank all the speakers. That's really great. Thank you very much.